All right, so what does cognition mean? Cognition means thought processes, right? Thought processes. So in this last segment of our personality and self lecture, we're going to talk about cognitive individual differences. So these reflect people's desires or tendencies to engage in specific mental activities. We're going to look at 3 cognitive individual differences, starting here with need for cognition. Need for cognition is a tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful cognitive activities. High scorers are more motivated to engage in cognitive analysis than those who are low. For instance, high scorers are more likely to spend their free time in activities like reading or maybe playing games like chess, compared to low scorers who are more likely to spend their free time doing something like watching television. Also, differences have been found in internet usage preferences. High scorers prefer to use the internet to search for current events or news, or for general education purposes, to look up product information. Low scorers, on the other hand, tend to use the internet more for entertainment purposes. Research shows that consumers who score high focus more on central product relevant information and evaluate that information more critically. Low scorers focus more on peripheral cues. Remember peripheral cues, right? Like things such as maybe celebrity endorsers, other attractive people in advertisements, bright colored packaging, emotional appeals, etc. Need for humor also plays a critical role in the processing of persuasive communications. Need for humor is the degree to which people crave or seek out and enjoy humor, such as maybe amusement or wit, or nonsense. Need for humor is more motivationally driven. So we're not really talking about one's own sense of humor, but instead his or her tendency to seek out humor. Got that? So low scorers are less affected by level of humor in ads than high scorers. High scorers form more favorable attitudes toward truly humorous ads. However, they are turned off by weak humor. Finally, there's an interaction between need for humor and need for cognition. High need for cognition scores can override need for humor when they are highly motivated to process product relevant cues. In other words, in this situation, there tends to be no effect of true humor. So overall, those with the highest positive response to humor are consumers who are both low in need for cognition and high in need for humor. Make sense? Marketers can use this information to target particular audiences most effectively. How might you think so? Can you think of a TV program during which you'd be best advised by this research to place humorous ads? Think about it. So if you thought of shows like, for instance, The Jon Stewart Show or Saturday Night Live, this is great. You're on the right track. And especially popular sitcoms, because they tend to attract lower need for cog viewers. Need for closure is the last cognitive individual difference we're going to look at here. And this is the need to come to a decision as soon as possible, to come to speedy decisions. Now, this is different than low need for cognition. Low need for cog, as that is often called, is not wanting to think very much or very hard. But one low in need for cognition could still take a long time in making a decision, just engaging in low-level thinking along the way. So need for closure is the need to arrive at a speedy decision. As you can imagine, speedy decisions are not usually our best ones. People who are high in need for closure are more likely to rely on quick tricks in their thinking. So things like stereotypes or heuristics and biases when making judgments about other people or when making decisions, maybe relying on things like superstition, right? Anything basically that speeds up a decision, any of those quick tricks. In consumer behavior, those high in need for closure are more likely to rely on simple heuristics like peripheral cues, all those peripheral cues that we just talked about, and or the because heuristic. Remember that a lot of ads supposedly give you a reason, right, for buying their product. But remember the because heuristic. You know, even if an ad states you should buy this because blah, 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 sometimes people assume the blah, blah, blah contains a good reason just because it comes after the word because, when in fact, it may not be a reason at all that follows in that language, as we saw in a particularly humorous study that we looked at before. So as pictured in this comic, people differ in need for closure, the extent to which they'd rather just end it all by coming to a premature decision. Those high in need for closure tend to react with a two-step process that is called in psychology seize and freeze. Seize meaning coming to quicker decisions, and then freeze meaning maintaining their closure as long as possible. So even in the face of disconfirming evidence, being more close-minded about other alternatives. Thus, people who are high in need for closure tend to consider fewer alternatives and less information about alternatives, make quicker judgments, and ironically exhibit higher levels of confidence in their decisions. Okay, 3 tips derived from this lecture material, just 3 examples. Tip number 1, remember the name utilization technique. When a salesperson uses your name more than usual, let this be a trigger to remember this manipulation technique and more critically analyze their claims. This is the beauty of a consumer psychology class. It increases the transparency of manipulation techniques. We become less vulnerable to them as we become more aware of them. Tip number 2. Do you happen to have the tendency to seize and freeze when making purchasing decisions? Meaning you happen to be high in the need for what? Can you remember? Need for closure. When making particularly large purchasing decisions, if this is the case, you may wish to bring a friend or family member along who is on the opposite end of the continuum, has difficulty stopping the research process and reaching a decision. This is called a complementary relationship in psychology. And you can even trade services when they need someone to help them actually reach a decision, right? Tip number 3, remember self-monitoring when someone pretends to agree with you just to make you like them and trust them more. Well, let's say you are considering buying a car and the salesperson agrees with your political views. You know, try out some other views. Just kind of work them into the conversation. Maybe your philosophical views, your religious views. How about your preference for plain or peanut M&Ms, etc.? Very early on, it can become quite humorous and, while at the same time, increase your critical judgment and scrutiny. So this concludes our lecture on the self and personality in consumer psychology. And here is your guerrilla marketing example. Clearly, mounting a huge toilet paper roll onto a billboard is unconventional. But here's a good review question from this learning and memory lecture. What kind of reinforcement is this ad using? Positive or negative? If you thought negative reinforcement, you are right. They here are reminding you of something very negative from which you may need the relief claimed to be offered by their product. Remember that negative reinforcement is reinforcing a behavior by removing something negative as a consequence of that behavior. Also, as a review, is this an example of classical or operant conditioning? And the answer is operant.